So that's the theory of cognitive dissonance. Throughout the period of time in history over the last 200 years, there's been many events in our country that have taken place behind the scenes that the general public in America knows very little about at the time, and eventually it works its way out into the general public. HGR 192 is one of those things. HGR 192 is one of the instruments that President Roosevelt used to change the face of America in every way. This HGR 192 is referred to as a joint resolution to suspend the gold standard and abrogate the gold. So everybody says this is the gold clause, and other people say this is the bankruptcy of the United States, and other people say this is where they took the substance out of the system, and all of those things are probably correct, okay? But there's so much more in this document than gold. I believe that they used the gold and the word gold and what they were doing to mask what was really taking place. That's what I believe. You'll have to research it and find out what you believe. On the second page is the actual session law of HGR 192, right out of the session book. Okay? The first page is a restatement of the second page. Okay, so that you can see that it's an actual document. Okay? Now, there's some quite interesting things that went on back in the 1920s and 30s. Obviously, I'm not old enough to remember back then, but in a study or a research of what went on and what we now know by things that different people have written and researched, we know enough not to believe the standard party line. We know enough that we now know that Roosevelt in 1932, when he took office, we know that he created a situation in the Supreme Court where everything he did was rubber stamped. We know that for a fact. Because up until that time, the Constitution said there could be no law impairing the obligation of contract. Okay? Every constitution, state constitution in the United States, there's a clause in that constitution that says there can be no law impairing the obligation of contract. Now, you and I, as individuals, have the right to contract to do anything lawful that two people want to do. Which brings me to another point. The only way that a person has rights in this country is as an individual. Okay? If you go, the first thing when something happens in your neighborhood, what is the first thing that everybody says to do? We got to get together and do something about this. I disagree. Okay? I disagree 100%. That is the most fatal flaw in any action you attempt to take. Okay? Because collectively, you have to have an attorney. And an attorney's first duty is to the court, the system. Okay? If you have an individual right, and by the way, we're going to talk about individual rights here when we get into words and definitions. I'm going to show you exactly how this works. Individually, you have the biggest stick in the United States. Why?
Unlimited liability.
You not only have unlimited liability, but you have I just lost my train of thought. You have unlimited liability, and you have the right of a guaranteed form of a Republican form of government. Now that is not the party of George Bush. Okay? In a Republican form of government, you have I put it like this. The majority wins an election. Their first responsibility is to the rights of the minority, and a minority is one. They have to protect the rights of each and every individual. Now, the moment that you act collectively, you're no longer an individual. You're a group. And you have to have another person to represent you in another form. That's called an attorney. He is a representer. He's not a representer, he's a representer. Think of the word and the emphasis on the word. Okay? He is a person who represents you in another form. Now, if that's the case, you would need to find out what form is he representing you in. Now, collectively, you're in a situation where he has to take the thoughts and ideas of a whole and put them forth to the court. Individually, you can all do the same thing. But individually, you can go in and demand, protest, not consent to anything they're trying to do. And they then cannot act. And if they do, they're acting outside of their oath of office and bounds of government. Okay? They took an oath. Not us. They call us constitutionalists. It's not me that took an oath to that document. By the way, think about another word. Pledge. What does the word pledge mean? If you're pledging something, it's a promise. A pledge is a promise. A pledge is a commitment. A pledge is a contract. So in school, when we're in first and second grade, the first thing we're taught, I pledge allegiance to that flag. Okay? How many times, I was a basketball coach for a couple years at our high school, and instead of singing the Star Spangled Banner, they would say the Pledge of Allegiance. And so, okay, I'll buy into this. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the democracy for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Is that not true? It is true. You don't pledge allegiance to the republic. There is no such thing. That's not what that is. That's the democracy. Okay? The definition of democracy. Majority rule, right? Here in the West, how many people here from the West? Idaho, Oregon, Montana? Okay, so everybody knows what a coyote is. The definition of democracy: 3 coyotes and a sheep go to dinner. They vote on what they're going to eat. Sheep ain't got a chance, does he? In a Republican form of government, the 3 coyotes and a sheep can go to dinner and they can't eat the sheep. Right? They have to protect the rights of that sheep. That's a Republican form of government. Okay? The majority rules, but they have to protect the rights of the individual. Now, you won't hear that lesson in government class. Okay? A Republican form of government in government class is a representative government where you elect an official who goes to represent you and what you believe. Yeah, right. What dream was that? Okay? When Roosevelt did what he did to this country, and you know, my father and my grandfather thought that President Roosevelt walked on water because he brought this country out of the Depression. But what they didn't realize is that it was the same people that created the Depression that brought them out of the Depression. Okay? All that was about was gaining control of the farmland. Go back and look it up. You expand credit, you expand credit, you expand credit, you get the farmer to go out and buy more land, put more crops in production, and then you cut off the credit.